So Nebraska's new offensive coordinator, Marcus Satterfield, had a press conference a few days ago where he laid out his vision for the offense. It was perfect timing because we've been planning a video about that exact topic, and he gave us some awesome insight that's really going to help this video to be more accurate than it would have been without. Leave a like for us and tell us in the comments, what changes do you think need to be made to the offense to be successful in 2023? So Gary, first off, I feel like Satterfield is genuinely excited to be in Nebraska, and I really believe it. I don't think he was just blowing smoke with his explaining that he couldn't wait for Matt Rule to call him, and when Matt Rule called him, he was so excited he didn't let it get out of his mouth all the way that he wanted him to come to Nebraska. He's like, yes, let's do it. I really kind of fell for that, and I believe it. And there's a lot of other things to like about his press conference. He and Matt Rule are both winning everyone over. Was there anything that stood out to you that got you excited or give you pause?
I think a lot of the excitement coming from him was geared more towards being back with Rule. He talked about him quite a bit and how he likes coaching with him and how he's pushed him and other coaches to be better and whatnot. The thing that kind of threw me off was the fullback talk. I know that's a thing to get people kind of fired up, and what people talk about a lot is getting back to like the power run game, but we don't have one. You know what I mean? I don't hear anything of all these recruits that we've got. A lot of the transfer portal guys that we're targeting or talking to, there's ways around that. Obviously, you can do basically like we did last year with Brewington quite a bit, and even Borkature a little bit, and line them up kind of that H-back spot and having them seal off the edges and be lead blockers and things like that. And you're going to have a couple new guys, young guys you would think will start getting some play. Who knows if we finally get Fedoni going, Borkature be back, things like that. So I'm kind of curious to see what exactly comes out of the whole we're going to use the fullback and do things like that. Like, are you really going to get a fullback that's his position, that's what he does, he comes in and you run a lot of power eye type stuff? Or is it going to be different motions of tight ends moving into the backfield and going about it that way? But I mean, yeah, it sounds good. We definitely have the running backs. We looking at some of his other film, like when you and I were looking at before at the South Carolina game film, the vast majority of the run game was sideline to sideline. They did some power stuff when they were in short down distances, but there was a lot of getting outside, a lot of things out of the wildcat, jet sweeps, stuff like that. But then now you're relying on your receivers to block. So you see we're getting a lot of these track guys and speed guys. I don't know if you have to put a lot of emphasis and focus on getting them developed into being more physical bodies. And he talks about that, trying to get a few more receivers. We just got the guy from Kemp from Virginia today, but he alludes to, getting different body types at the receiver position, adding depth to that. So I don't know what to expect other than, what he says. Obviously, you got to take a guy for what he's saying, but just looking at what we have to try and do what he's talking about doing, I don't know, man. What do you think? You think the offensive line's going to be able to do that, to be able to run a lot of power run game?
I'm taking a wait and see approach with the offensive line. I have the lowest expectations because everybody in the coaching room seems to think, or at least they're acting like the offensive line is A-okay as is. And I feel like that's nothing but coach speak. But I did like that Satterfield has some O-line coaching experience. I think that can help. I think as much as we can get, the better.
When you look at the offensive line, it's interesting because you have the mixed camps of the Raiola hire, right? So they either kept him because they think that's one of the easiest ways to get Dylan Raiola, and then you've got the other part that's like, well, he's the one coach that didn't get to have any of his guys, didn't get to make any real decisions. The line wasn't that good the year before he got here, and they lost the three best guys early on. So, I mean, you've got that back and forth, but Matt Rule has said, he likes to be in with the line guys in the trenches. He likes working with the O-line and the D-line. Ed Foley has experience with coaching offensive line. Obviously, Raiola's still there. Like you said, Satterfield's been assistant O-line coach. So it seems like there's a lot of guys with that tool in their bag, so to speak, of working with the offensive line. And it might take a good chunk, you know what I mean, to develop some of these guys. And one thing you look back to, not to make excuses for them, but offensive line isn't really a position where you get a true freshman or you get a guy that, you know, maybe within a year he's really effective, you know, plugged in and really effective. It usually takes quite a while to learn the position, especially at that age, to pack on weight and the strength that it takes to play that position. And a lot of the guys that we've had have been put into it pretty quick. So that goes both ways. You know, you're going to look bad and you're learning on the fly, and you're learning, you know, the last few years, multiple different systems. Each year is a new system, a lot of times a new coach. So I think if you have some guys that have a lot of experience and know-how working with offensive lines, you actually establish an identity early on instead of going all the way through the season and not really knowing what the hell kind of offense you are. I think there's ways that you can make the learning process easier for the guys, but it just depends on how much of the game that is. You know, I mean, you can run different running plays, obviously. So maybe not everything's going to be that type of power. And even at that, maybe they're going to pass fair, you know, more. I mean, it's, you look back at his stats from both last year, the last 2 years, just say with South Carolina, and then look back when he was running Temple, they still threw for more yards than they average running. And I mean, obviously, duh, you know, but I mean, it's like the play calls were pretty close to 50-50. So, I mean, according to Matt Rule, they're going to do everything they can to work in the favor of the strengths of the players. So that's where I kind of have mixed emotions on, like, okay, well, then you're definitely not doing a lot of power run game because the strength of your team isn't your offensive line. I think everybody kind of agrees that last year the offensive line did better run blocking than they did pass protecting. So I don't know, man. I'm with you. Like, we're going to have to wait and see, but it's just, I don't know if they have a guy in mind in the portal that is going to be this fullback, if it's just going to be a lot of using the tight ends in the fullback position.
Either way, I think it's going to be very run heavy. That's the impression he gives off. He talked about being on a crusade about the huddle and how important it is.
Yeah.
He said, you know, it starts with winning the line of scrimmage and running the ball, kind of a fundamentals of football approach he's taking to it that I really like. He's very adamant that we're going to get in a huddle and we're going to call football plays, and it's going to be a pro style offense. But he seems really intent on running the ball. And I'm just so glad that we have Anthony Grant more than likely returning. And
he is.
The way that Satterfield talks about Jeff Sims, to me, gives off big, he's our guy next year vibes. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I thought the same thing when Matt Rule was talking about him. He kind of went out of his way to elaborate on him more than a lot of the other guys. And there's the aspect of Casey not being ready throughout spring, right? So you're trying to implement a new offense, and on all facets of your offense, you need a quarterback that's going to be able to take your first couple snaps of the season to be the guy practicing out throughout, you know, your spring and summer ball. So it's, I get that, where it might be like, well, they might know Casey's not going to be ready until October sometime, and even then, that's when he's going to start being good to go. I mean, I don't know. I'm just throwing out like a possibility that they know they have to have somebody else. So getting a guy that's a dual threat guy, he definitely has a stronger arm than Casey. He's definitely more of a threat with his legs. I don't think his decision making is as good as Casey's, and I don't think his accuracy is even, you know, maybe the same, probably a little worse. But I think part of that run game is going to be a lot of RPOs. We saw that at both South Carolina and Temple, where the quarterbacks use pretty heavy in the run game. So that might already be giving him a leg up, you know, even if Casey is going to be good to go, where he might have to, whoever gets it is going to have to win it, it sounds like. But he definitely does seem to be favoring, both of them seem to have a favoritism towards Sims already. And like I said, I don't know if that's just because of what they've seen on tape between the two. They already feel like that's the guy, or they know we're not going to have Casey all through spring and summer, and won't have him until sometime next year. So we've got to start moving forward with another guy that we can implement this system with and get ready for the start of the season. You watched film on him. Are you as excited as everybody else seems to be, or do you think? I'm kind of like, I watch him and I'm like, okay, he does some things that we don't have, but I also see a lot of flaws where we have, I feel like we have other guys that are better at stuff, mainly Casey. You know, and Casey had a good season last year, all things considered, mainly offensive line. But I mean, I don't know, man. Just nothing to like really excite me. I know you usually get a little bit more fired up about guys and their highlight tapes.
He looks good, but so did Casey, and Casey had his flaws. I'm still in Richard Torres's camp. I want him to start. And from the sounds of it, Matt Rule is definitely not scared to start a freshman quarterback. And I believe Richard Torres has that kind of talent. I'm willing to die on that hill. We'll see.
I'm not 100% sure on Torres just because, one, we haven't seen him. And from what you heard about him having the strongest arm and all that, we saw his high school tape. He does have a strong arm. He does move really well in the pocket. I don't see him as that running quarterback, though. If you're going to try and run a lot of RPOs where your quarterback's actually going to run and do different things like that, I don't know that outside of being a good scrambler that it translates to him. It's really hard for me to judge a guy like that we saw his high school tape, a few games or whatever. And like you said, die on the hill. I can't argue too much or die alongside with you or whatever. I just don't know. But I haven't heard these guys talk about him. You hear a little bit about Casey when they're asked about Casey, but other than that, they, like, back to your original point, they seem to be pretty high on Sims. And hopefully, he wasn't in the best of situations either at Georgia Tech. So between the talent around him, even Matt Rule kind of alluded to some of the play calling and stuff he had to deal with. And his offensive line didn't look like it was anything to brag about either. So, as this thing develops and you get guys learn this new system, like, anything's possible. Offensive line can start looking good. A guy that maybe struggled or was mediocre at a different place comes here is good. We had a new center coming. Aren't they trying to get targeting that kid from Stanford that's transferring, another lineman? So, I mean, there's still some things that might change on that front. Like I said, I'm really kind of thrown off. Not to keep going back to the same thing, really kind of thrown off about the whole fullback thing. Like, I don't know who you use. If this was last year, I would say, oh, they're going to make Yant line up more as a fullback and do his thing. But obviously that's not the case. I don't know what other body type we have in the backfield that could transition to that. That's why I just keep assuming it's going to be a tight end playing more of an H-back spot.
Best thing we had on the roster for that was Brewington, and he's gone.
Yeah, 100%. Like, hearing them talk, I really wish he had at least one more year to see what he could do in the system, being utilized, both blocking and even, if he's going to carry the ball some. You saw he was decent when he got some balls thrown his way. He was just a stud at sealing off them edges for the running backs.
Final question. How did you feel about when Satterfield talked about having a backfield filled with wide receivers and running backs, and having running backs play wide receiver, and talking about speed killing? And you mentioned his offense before has been get to the edges. How do you feel about that in the Big Ten? Does that scare you, or are you excited about speed?
Yeah, again, man, a lot of that side to side lateral running, you really rely on your receivers to be able to block on the edges. And if you don't get the multiple body types like he's talking about, and you've got a bunch of track guys that typically are a little taller and thinner, you really have to have good technique, because you're not really using size and strength to block guys and seal off at that point. So, I mean, it's a double-edged sword, right? So if you can get to the edges, or you can hit the seams, and you've got multiple guys that are damn near as fast as Trey Palmer was, well, you saw what that can do to some of the Big Ten defenses, right? And it's the teams that had success, like, was it Illinois, I think, and maybe Minnesota, I can't remember, but they were bracketing him with the safety. Well, you can do that to one guy, but if you've got two or three guys with that kind of speed, it's tough to do. And I don't get too excited over the positionless football thing, like I know some people are, because you look at last year, running different receivers out of, jet sweeps, and you can do different types of options and things like that where you've got them. They talked about Ramir, being kind of a hybrid receiver running back. I think everybody would like to see that. You've got some other guys, these track guys, a lot of times you're just trying to get them the ball in space so that they can burn people on the side. It's not always just trying to blow the top off of the defense. So if you can get creative in the run game and get some of these speedy receivers the ball, on end arounds, reverses, you're going to probably see a lot of bubble screens, receiver screens, things like that. So I don't think it's anything really out of the norm. I think it just kind of throws people off. Like, what do you mean position? Like, why would you have this guy playing this position and doing that? I don't think you're going to have him playing that position. I mean, I could be wrong, but I just feel like, again, we were watching some of the film before, you saw how often they like to throw to the running backs and how often they like to get the wide receivers involved in the run game. The game against Tennessee, they ran a lot of wildcat and they had a wide receiver taking the snaps, not a running back. So, I mean, it's just more wrinkles for the defense to have to stop. And if you can combine what they're talking about with winning the line of scrimmage, using fullbacks or, like I keep harping on, tight ends in the H-back spot, and you can make them worry about that and keep guys in the box, we can get some mismatches on the outside and some one-on-ones with those speedy receivers. And then when you're mixing that up with a lot of side-to-side run game using the speed, now they can't just stack heavy inside the box, right? They have to be ready for that, but also respect the edges. So it's like everything else, man. Like everybody's offense and schemes and the plays they call and everything are all designed to work. It's just about execution. And I think it's going to take a little while for the team to learn another offense, but then to develop these guys towards what they want them to do for these scenarios. You know what I'm saying? So I think it could be a typical Matt Rule season where the win losses aren't very good, but hopefully by like the middle to the end of the year, you see things really starting to click. You start seeing plays that work better than others because it's starting to sink in, and you're seeing just development out of guys mainly on the line. And like I said, hopefully the receivers, if they are dependent on to block a fair amount. God, man, it's I feel like we're exactly in the same boat we were last year, where it's like, okay, wait and see, because everything's new again.
Tell us what you think in the comments. Leave a like if you haven't already. We'll see you guys next time. Go Big Red.